I'd like to understand this whole idea of that all creeds being an abomination.
Yep.
Why do you consider yourself a Christian?
I appreciate that question.
Hello, Saints. My name is Jeff. I'm a pastor in Utah, exploring everything I can about the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And in this video, I'm wanting to focus specifically on the history of Joseph Smith as articulated in the Pearl of Great Price, which is one of the classics, if you will. It's part of the corpus of Latter-day Saint scriptures. I have the luxury to have access to great minds and experts that devote their lives to these things, and Kerry Muhlestein from Brigham Young University, and I appreciate you just kind of walking me through the history of Joseph Smith.
So happy to be doing it with you.
Yeah. So let's just dive right into it, because I found as I read through this, in my desire to understand Joseph more clearly and to understand his story and his background and a lot of the claims that he's making, it's fascinating to have heard rumors of various aspects of his story. Well, I've heard some people say that in the first vision he experienced this. I've heard some people say that when he finally accessed the plates, this happened as opposed to that happened. So you get all these different accounts. There are rumors. There are other facts swirling around about what I've experienced, but this is my effort to clear that up.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Okay.
There's a fascinating context behind it. I don't know if you want to talk about that now. So in 1838, which is when the account that's in the Pearl of Great Price is written, a number of things have just happened. It's been a really difficult year. We won't get into the history of what's been going on where Joseph is in Kirtland, Ohio, but there have been bank failures, all sorts of things. A lot of bitter persecution. A lot of people he's been very close to have left the church and are persecuting him and are like printing stories about him that are demonstrably false, trying to go after him legally by swearing affidavits of the things that are demonstrably false and so on. And these are people who were once close to him and they've lost their money or whatever, and they feel upset. He is going to respond to these and say, this is what actually happened, especially in the circumstances where people are telling stories about something they could never know what happened. I'm the only one who knows what happened. Let me tell you what happened. Okay. And he writes it beautifully, I think. But it's in the midst of the worst persecution imaginable and everywhere where there are members of the church. Things are really, really hard.
Okay, that's really helpful background and context to what compelled him to write this. And it's consistent with his language up front. I mean, that was the one thing that hit me right off the bat. But he says pretty clearly here, even in verse 1, that he's writing to disabuse the public mind and put all inquiries after the truth in possession of the facts as they have transpired in relation both to myself and the church, so far as I have such facts in my possession. So that makes sense based on the fact that there were facts in other people's possession, but he's saying, and I don't know if this is where the phrase comes from, it could be completely unrelated, but I've heard a lot of times associated to Joseph the whole "no man knows my history." So like I'm the one that knows what actually happened.
Yeah, he did say that, and he seems to be saying that in regards to two things. Like, no, I'm the only one who knows about a lot of these things, and some of the things that I've seen and know and have experienced with God, I'm not even supposed to tell you. So you'll never know my history.
And then he goes autobiographical at that point. So born in 1805 in Vermont. His father moved the family to Palmyra, New York when he was about 10. He is naming all of his family members and the individuals in his household that made that move. Yep. And it's really important for me as a non-church member to contextually understand that this is taking place. In verse 5, he talks about when there's great religious excitement around them, which as we understand that in my context, it's a second great awakening, which happens in Kentucky. It pushes up into the Northeast before it leaps across the pond, and you start seeing stuff in England and Germany and places like that. But in the meantime, he's seeing all this transpire around him, and it's coming out of primarily a lot of the Methodist revivals that had started years before but are now continuing.
Right.
And
which in his little area kind of gets a reaction from the Presbyterians.
Of course. So now you have denominationally this great excitement about spiritual activity and spiritual happenings in Vermont and New York. with the Methodists, the Presbyterians, the Baptists,
Yeah.
maybe a few others. And these are denominations that still exist to this day. As a matter of fact, and again, I take the opportunity to communicate this as often as possible, but we don't, within Protestant Christianity, believe that all the other denominations are wrong and going to hell. We actually honor one another, even where we disagree with each other on secondary issues. And to that point, the thing that resonates with me here in verse 5 is I grew up in a traditional Pentecostal church where there would be a lot of revivalistic culture. Right. And then I went to my undergrad at a private Methodist school called Greenville University in Illinois. While I was in that Methodist school, I was mentored by Presbyterians at Covenant Seminary in St. Louis, and they discipled me and brought me along. I'm still connected to them to this day. Fast forward, then I do my graduate studies at a Baptist grad school. So I have not only culturally experienced, but my spiritual heritage and even my ministry training has come from a Pentecostal, Methodist, Presbyterian, and Baptist background.
So, see, the Lord has prepared you to be able to see things from a lot of different points of view. That's wonderful. That's fantastic.
I love it, and I celebrate it. And throw some Lutherans in there as well, because not only is my brother Lutheran, but we sent our kids to a private Lutheran school before moving to Utah.
That's fantastic.
And then the denomination that I am ordained with, that I minister with, is none of these.
Yeah, that's true. There you go.
But we all get along, and I don't know if we all get along, but we all know how to agree. However, in Joseph's day, with all of this religious zeal, beyond the zealousness came debating and disagreements. And
sometimes with acrimony and sometimes not, right?
Sure. And it is that chaos that he is perceiving that is off-putting to him, and it troubles him. Is that accurate?
That is accurate. And it's happening even with his own family. That's part of what he very much loves and respects his mother and father. And when he wants to know, so we get it a little bit from this account, from that other account I told you, the first history he started, which is more personal. It seems to be the first time he's like really, you almost get the feeling that he's just like, once he opens this up, he's like vomiting this experience onto the page. It's really raw and really personal. And he talks about how he knows he needs to be saved. He's convicted of his sins is a phrase he uses. And he wants to be saved, but he hears different ideas and he doesn't know how to be saved. And that's true out there, but it's also true at home. His mother becomes a Presbyterian, right? And you know this difference between like kind of a Calvinist and a Methodist viewpoint on how depraved we are and whether we're going to be whether God is saving a few or a lot, all sorts of differences there, right? His mother is becoming Presbyterian. His father is largely a Universalist. So his father's father had some dreams that convinced him that and this goes back to a conversation we had in our other video about the Pearl of Great Price in general, but that Christianity, the way it existed in the time of Peter and Paul, doesn't exist in that day. And he's actually had in this vision or this dream the idea that one of his descendants will help restore that Christianity. As a result, that Smith family stays aloof from churches. They believe in God, stays aloof from churches. They're hesitant to ally with any specific church because they don't think that any of them are holding exactly what they need.
Right.
Lucy convinces her husband, Lucy Mack Smith, his mother, convinces Joseph's father, Joseph Smith Sr., to go with her a couple times. He gets such a strong reaction from his family members, he stops going. And he has Universalist leanings, but the way my friend Steve Harper, who's just a fantastic expert on the first vision, the way he often puts it is, for Lucy, Joseph's mother, it's better to go to any church than no church at all. And for Joseph's father, it's better to go to no church than to go to the wrong church. And Joseph finds himself caught between, and he can't get answers that he feels confident with by appealing to all the different ministers, and he can't get it from appealing within his own family. Some of his siblings go with his mother, some are staying with his father, and he doesn't know what to do.
Okay, that's really helpful because I don't often hear how significant the role was of what was going on, that tension within the family, whether it be the Presbyterian leaning where he's leaning more Methodist, and then you have the outside pressures of all that, but then he also has other family members who are more universalistic.
Yeah.
And that's troubling for anyone. I mean, even to this day, if you're in a split faith household where there's a lot of disagreement, you add into it a zealous spiritual climate, which is what was taking place in the Second Great Awakening. That can cause a lot of confusion and hurt, and it puts a strain on relationships, which would make sense why he was so deeply troubled and maybe personally deeply moved, as you see in verses 11 through 12, to consider James 1:5, if anybody desires wisdom to ask of the Lord, and that gives him sort of a blast of light in the midst of this cloud of chaos of, oh, there's something I can do about this. It's almost like he went from feeling very powerless to all of a sudden saying, there's something I can do here. The Bible tells me what I can do, and that is to ask the Lord to give me wisdom.
Yeah, I think he had given up on finding answers from family. He'd given up on finding answers from the Scriptures. He very much believed the Scriptures could give him answers, and that's why he was always, kept reading them. But then he'd hear the different ministers interpret them different ways, and then he says, okay, he says he starts this when he's about 12, so it's about 2 years of trying to figure this out. I'm just a young kid. If they don't know how to interpret, I don't know how to. So I think he is getting to the point where he's giving up on being able to find an answer, and then this verse convinces him, I can go right to the source.
Right.
There is a way to find this answer that I thought maybe I wouldn't be able to find.
And he really is a kid. You use the term kid. He's 14, 15 years old.
Yeah.
So this is when he makes his way out into the woods in Palmyra, New York. He does this very thing, asks the Lord for wisdom, and there's a whole sort of dramatic scene that unfolds where his tongue is bound, surrounded by darkness. He feels that he's about to be essentially destroyed before a light pierces the darkness, and there's the appearance of two personages that begin to speak to him. And this is when a dialogue then unfolds. There's an announcement of these personages, initially saying, "This is my son, with whom I'm pleased," which is similar to what we see in the baptism scene in the New Testament with Jesus.
Right. Or even the Transfiguration.
Transfiguration, right? And Joseph proceeds with this desire to ask which church he should join. And what is responded to him is that you shouldn't join any of them, that all of the creeds of the current churches are an abomination, and he doesn't necessarily then tell him what to do, other than Joseph knows he's now been invited into what's going to be a longer sort of ongoing revelation to himself about how this is all going to sort of unfold. Yeah. Is that accurate?
Yeah. In some ways, his major message is wait. I will unfold things to you later. For now, wait.
Yeah. So let's just pause right there based on the whole first vision. So a few questions that I have there. I have heard that there are anywhere between 4 and 9 different versions of the first vision.
Yeah.
How do church members, how does the church sort of handle the various versions of this and the harmonization of it here?
So, and that's one of the areas I kind of specialize in. I wrote a book where I tried to take all of the accounts and harmonize them, and it was actually really fun and fascinating for me. But let's be clear what they are. They're 4 distinct firsthand accounts, right? So one of them, as we talk about this history, I told you he wrote, started a history, and then this is his second attempt at a history. So those are 2 of them. There's one in between. So 1832 is when he starts to first write a history. 1838 is when he writes the history that we have here in the Pearl of Great Price. In 1835, he has a visitor come to him and he tells him the story. Now, he tells the story lots and lots and lots of times. In this case, a scribe happened to be with him, so the scribe is sitting there writing it down. So we get that. And then in 1842, and we mentioned this in the other video that we did, the mayor of Chicago, a guy named John Wentworth, asks him for information and history of the church and so on. So in a letter, he writes him an account of it, right? So And then you talked about 9. Well, we have 5 accounts of people who heard him who printed something about what they heard.
Oh, okay.
Right. So, and in some ways it's more than that. Like you have a little journal reference here and you have a little journal reference there, that kind of a thing. Right. So it depends on what you want to call an account, how many we have. But you have secondhand accounts, but you only have those 4 first-hand accounts that are distinct. I mean, there's some other times where you get a first-hand account, but he's quoting from one of the others, right? So 4 distinct ones. And they come together wonderfully. In fact, as I tried to harmonize these, the only part that was difficult to harmonize was the account that you mentioned where he's attacked by Satan. And it took me a while to figure out, and what was hard to harmonize about it wasn't that they were contradictory, but to figure out a sequence. And it was actually kind of one of these aha moments I had once where I was like, oh, I was writing this is so confusing for me to figure out what was going on. And I thought, oh, this was a confusing experience for you. The essence of that experience was confusion and fear. So it's not surprising that as he writes about it, it's hard for me to put the pieces together. His confusion is conveyed in the way he talks about it, right?
And in all of the accounts, does he consistently receive a visitation from 2 personages? Is there ever a point where he only from one?
Right, and that's what you'll find in each account is that they are different depending upon his audience and his intent, his focus, right?
Sure.
So that first one, it's more of a personal history, and he's talking about what happened to him, and that's the focus. The others, the Wentworth one, that's a focus on helping other people to understand what happened to him. It's very outward facing. So he tones down language, like he doesn't mention abomination in there, right? Yeah. Which is probably a good PR move. But in the 1838 account that we're looking at, he says, yeah, it's about me, but it's really an official history of the church. So he'll focus on here are the problems with the churches here. I'm going to restore a church, that kind of a thing, right? So it really depends on the audience and the intent, what he talks about. And so we don't really get contradictions as much as we put them together, we get a fuller and fuller picture. It was really pretty easy to harmonize them when I did that. But yeah, there are differences, just like, if you were to write or tell a story 6 years apart,
sure,
you'd always tell it differently.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about the substance of what was stated here. And I have to speak to it just because I'm mentioned here in a sense, right? But in verse 19, I'd like to understand this whole idea of that all creeds being an abomination.
Yep.
My interaction with Latter-day Saints aren't quite that harsh.
No.
Right? As somebody who, and another thing, I won't get into this too much, but when you talk about creedal Christianity, that is a very broad brush about those who just hold to sort of traditional Orthodox belief through the year.
And what creed and whatever else.
Right, because I know a significant amount of Protestant churches, we don't even recite creeds like we have before. But point being that the core, what we would say, foundational doctrines being referred to as an abomination, where current Latter-day Saints that I speak to, they don't treat me as though I'm one that is abominable or my creeds being an abomination. Help me understand how the church understands that. What does that mean? How does that inform even your regard or your interaction with people who still function, like myself, within that paradigm?
You ask a great question. So I'll say at the outset, I can't speak for the church itself. I can just tell you what I've seen over time and what I'm seeing now and my own beliefs and so on. But even before that, let me couch it in different ways. If we were to be studying other revelations to Joseph Smith, the Lord uses very strong language about Joseph Smith, about his followers. When he calls Joseph wicked at times, he calls Martin Harris wicked, but then he says, "But you can repent, you can come to me," and so on. So while this language may seem strong because it's pointed outward, that strong of language is pointed inward at times as well, right? So the Lord doesn't mince words. He says, okay, this is an abomination before me, and yet you don't have to be an abomination. Right. So I think we should couch it in those terms. Why he uses that word and what he means by creed, I can't profess to fully understand, and we have not, even among scholars that have talked about this and debated, there's not universal agreement,
Sure.
right? But my best guess is he's saying there are teachings about me and my nature and who I am that are not accurate, and I don't like that. That's how I would say it, right? And some of this we'll get down. So last time we talked about a fundamental difference, which is, are there prophets today or not? When my Protestant and evangelical friends, the thing that they don't like that we have prophets, right? But probably the thing that is the biggest disagreement is our view on the nature of Christ and the Trinity.
100%, yeah.
Yeah, that's when we talk about fundamental, that's as fundamental as it gets, right?
Right.
Although I think we can still be very Christian together and admit that for the most part, we're worshiping the same Christ, but in some very fundamental ways, we're not, right? So if you were to take this from our point of view, at least who we understand Christ to be, if he is saying they have mischaracterized me and misunderstood me and my Father and the relationship between me and my Father, and if you study the New Testament, especially the Gospel of John, in John, that's what Christ talks about more than anything else.
Yeah.
It's his relationship with his Father.
Right.
So if he's saying, I've been mischaracterized and I don't like that, maybe you could understand that a little bit more, right?
Sure.
It doesn't mean, and I want to be really emphatic about this, I don't think, well, Joseph Smith talked about his love for other Christians, that he would defend other Christians and their rights to believe what they believe, the good that came from all of his Christian friends. And when I say Christians, I want to say other Christians because we very much count ourselves as Christians. I know many Protestants don't count us as Christians because of that fundamental difference in a Trinitarian belief, but we feel a kinship to all Christians. We do not feel any Christians or professors of Christianity or professors of religion, as he actually says, are abominable. This is the way our prophet a little while ago, President Gordon B. Hinckley, put it. He said, we invite you to bring all the good that you have and see if we can add to it a little bit. And so I can totally see someone reading this verse 19, where it says it's an abomination in his sight and those professors are all corrupt. I can absolutely understand someone being offended at that.
Right. Yeah.
And
I mean,
yet the way I feel it and understand it, I think if you could see and feel my heart and my understanding and other leaders, you would not feel offended by the way we understand it and feel about it.
Sure. Yeah, and I think that's where it does just get super interesting because it really is right off the bat there, first vision, right?
Yeah.
That I don't know how else to put it, but I mean, them's is fighting words in a sense.
Oh yeah.
Because and you've outlined it very well here, but in the impetus or the catalyst of the restored gospel, you have the Protestant churches and even beyond, not only the creeds being called abominable, but to your point, the presentation of that, the voice that's coming through is a non-Trinitarian, two distinct personages. So at that point now we are, for lack of a better term, violating what we would say would be foundational biblical teaching.
Yeah. So see, and we would say not biblical, but I understand foundational teaching for sure.
Right. Yeah, and just speaking from a Protestant standpoint, it's like strike one, strike two.
Yeah.
You add strike three to it, then Joseph is essentially taking on this mantle of being the one that's going to it makes sense. Then you get down this a little bit further here in Joseph Smith history as he starts communicating this to pastors of his day. They're just not having anything of it.
Oh yeah,
because it is so against the grain of sort of the mainstream understanding of things,
which is understandable. And I should return to the caveat that we put in because I think it can match kind of what you were talking about. There have certainly been times where many members of our church, and I'm sure there are still some today, and even some leaders, based on the persecution and the different things, and again, like, okay, we're going to circle and protect ourselves, where we say, okay, we believe this, and what those other people believe is just so wrong. And in trying to set ourselves in distinction from other beliefs, we haven't always been as willing to see the good in others as I would say Joseph Smith was, or as we currently are. And so I think both groups have had some pretty strong reactions that aren't always as Christ-like as we would all like to be.
None of that warrants or justifies the violence and all the other stuff that was taking place in Kirtland and Missouri, and even Utah for that matter. But I almost just highlight that, and it probably goes without saying, but at the same time, it is a little confusing to us from the first vision on, to push away from the lunch table and say, no, we are our own thing, only to what it feels like all these years later to be like, hey, can we have a seat at the lunch table? It's like, wait a minute, you guys excused yourself a long time ago, right?
And I can see that because we want to be both distinct and part of the group at the same time. And it's not so much to be part of the group, although I do think, and this is just me, but I think socially and culturally, these in our current day, there is a strength that all religious believers probably need to draw on from each other, given some of the, and I don't want to get into politics or anything, but some of the climate wars going on, or not climate wars, sorry.
Culture.
Some of the cultural wars going on right now. There is reason for us to say, let's sit at a table together. I would say the thing that is most difficult for us as members of, and we've been emphasizing this name lately, so I'm going to say it this way, as members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, is to be considered not Christian. When in our view, now I know why. It's because of this fundamental difference about Trinitarianism and so on, right? But in our view, where we are all about Christ, and in our view, we are as Christian can be. To have other people call us not Christian just stings a little bit, right?
Of course,
and so the seat at the table we want is to say, okay, Catholics, Orthodox Christians, Protestants, and Latter-day Saints, we all believe in Christ. Whatever different views you have of what that means, we all believe in Christ, and we can be united in that thing.
Which is why this conversation I'm so strongly motivated to try to broker this conversation, because we will never hear one another out if we just dismiss each other out of hand and look for reasons to say, nope, like, we don't have anything to talk about. It was first vision. You guys said what you said, so we're out.
And verse 19 could become that if we were, for us and for you, if we were willing to let it be that way, right? And I am so grateful for efforts like yours and others, where we're trying, and there have been a lot of efforts for a while now, which I applaud, that where we're trying to say, okay, we understand our differences. We don't have to compromise on those differences,
right?
But let's also say we believe in Christ.
Yeah, and that's where, just to kind of put a fine point on that, and then we can move into this next phase of what Joseph experienced, is it's important. It's as important for evangelicals to understand where Latter-day Saints are coming from, and to not say, well, you believe in a different Jesus and move on. It's important that we don't do that without first, one, making sure we do understand what Latter-day Saints are proclaiming and testifying and believing. But secondly, also, we shouldn't do that before hearing what that individual has experienced. And that's why I usually really strongly encourage evangelicals and Latter-day Saints alike to share your testimonies with each other and have a conversation about that.
Good.
I'm not saying that you're going to walk away agreeing, but rather than just looking for the smoking gun as to why I can disqualify your faith, listen to the story of what the individual has experienced. And I think important conversations emerge there about the activity of Christ in the life of the individual.
Amen.
And I think that's really important.
And I would encourage members of my faith to please do the same. I know too many who don't feel that they don't want to try and learn from other Christians. They just want to talk about where someone else is wrong and they're right. And so we can learn so much from each other. I am a better Christian and a better member of my faith for the things I've learned from other Christians, and I'll say particularly years living in Jerusalem, where you're among so many different Christians and you worship together, but here and in other places as well, I'm a better member because of that, and I believe that those I interacted with are better Christians because of their interaction with me. And if members of my faith will have that attitude, and one day maybe I should share some stories on my podcast or something about the process that helped me be better at that. But we all need to get better at that. We can learn and become better Christians from each other, even if we continue to disagree on the nature of, we could call the Godhead, you call Trinity.
Well, to that point, maybe this would be a good way to punctuate this conversation, because we've covered a lot of ground, a lot more than we were planning on covering, which is great. You tell me, out of the context of this conversation, as we kind of rise, above the cloud floor here, why do you consider yourself a Christian in the face and in the midst of even all these sort of complex aspects of Joseph Smith that we just talked through?
I appreciate that question. I will say, for a number of reasons, the most important of which have been revelatory and transformative. I felt physical healing, but I have felt healing and forgiveness. I have felt something that it was not possible for me to have created on my own in terms of spiritual and soulful healing and forgiveness. I have felt that come from the outside and change me. I have felt who I am, my understanding, my abilities to love, all sorts of things, transformed from the outside in a way that can only be Jesus Christ. I've felt the Spirit bear witness to me in ways that I if you haven't had the experience, you can't describe it right to someone who hasn't had it. But I've had it in my home, in church. I've had it at the Garden Tomb. I've had it in the Holy Sepulchre. I've had it in so many different places. Powerful, powerful witness that Christ died for my sins, suffered and died for my sins, and was resurrected, and that I can live again. I've had it happen at thinking about the deaths of my parents, and had that same revelatory experience. I can also talk about intellectual experiences, and those have been fantastic and wonderful. But in the end, for me, I've seen it in other people. I've seen people change in ways that could only have happened by an outside power, and I believe it was that atoning sacrifice of Christ. The transformative power changed them, and I felt it change me, and that is so real. I'll speak like Joseph Smith. I know it's true, and I know I experienced it, and I know God knows I experienced it, and I can never forget it or deny it.
Man, thank you for sharing that. That's where all of this, I think, hopefully leads us to really access, not that these other conversations about claims and evidences don't matter, but in that context of everything that we're talking about, for you to be able to articulate what you experienced there is where I'm ready to turn off the camera and be like, we need to grab lunch and keep talking about this. I want to hear more about this. I would say grab coffee, because that's what we do in the Protestant world, but I can't invite you to that.
as members of our church, we're lacking that social element, but
yeah, that's all right. How did it happen that the church for a while was understanding or teaching or maybe just culturally embracing one method of translating as opposed to another, which is the seer stone with Oliver Cowdery?
Let's just say, as we have found more sources, more accounts, as we have studied them more, looked at cultural context, then we're understanding better what it may have looked like.